Hello, my scary friends. Don't forget to like video and subscribe to my channel. Hey, stop this, stop following, hey. A gaunt frame carries the tatters of the remaining humans of the Wendigo. His antlered head droops as his feral eyes shoot around, looking for his next victim. In life, the Wendigo had been greedy and sinful. In some legends, it was said that the crime for which a man is made into a Wendigo is the act of cannibalism. Stories tell of tribes and villages who turn to cannibalism in times of famine, a few members of the tribe saving themselves from starvation, yet damning themselves to turn into these hellish creatures. This old fable echoed through his mind as he cut up what was left of his brother. We have been snowed in for weeks, he thought, and this is the only way. Had he intentionally killed his brother with the purpose of eating him, perhaps it would be different. But he hadn't, he thought, rather, he had done his best to save him. Neared the end of his brother's life, he was so sick that he could not even eat the little scraps they had left. It was only when the last bit of hope for him had gone that he decided to spare him from suffering any longer. In truth, he was made sick at the thought of eating the flesh and blood of his own flesh and blood. He did not die for this purpose, he repeated to himself. It was the fever, not I, that killed him. As he repeated this to himself, he continued to work. He spared nothing but the head, which he could not bear to look at and covered with cloth. He had loved his brother. If he didn't, why would he have given him such mercy and kept him from suffering? It was the sick truth that one of them must live through this storm. By any means necessary, he said. When the storm ended, if the storm ended, he would go into town and file a missing person report for his brother. He would tell them that he had gone out in the storm and never come back. Even if he told them that he did what he did out of necessity, they would not see it that way. They might execute him or, even worse, institutionalize him. It was a good thing that most of the evidence would disappear over the next few days. The first bite made him vomit. The second did, too. The third did not, but it was the heaviest of the bites and sat like a rock in his stomach. Not being able to get down anymore, he took a break and went up to the second story, which was now the only vantage point out of their cabin. The snow had stopped for now, but the clouds were hanging in the sky still. He knew it would be dark soon. He thought again about his brother and decided he needed to wait one more day before he tried to eat any more. As cold as it was, he wouldn't spoil. He felt a little sick again at thinking about someone he once knew in these terms, but it subsided. He sat beneath the window and looked out into the surrounding forest for hours until a hollow scream filled the air. He snapped out of his trance and looked around. It was now pitch black outside. The terror in his heart was so great that he had forgotten what he had done, and he peered out into the darkness to try and locate the source of the call. Then, he heard it again. It cut through the night right into his very soul. It was not a human scream, nor an animal one, nor any scream from this world. He likened it to the call of an elk, except that whatever was making it was clearly no elk. It was shrill, hollow, but at the same time resounding throughout the forest as it shot into his core. He sat beneath the window all night, on guard from whatever creature had let loose such a sound. In the back of his mind, he knew that even if the creature were to present itself, he could not see it in the darkness. It may as well have been right under him. All at once, he realized it was now early in the morning. The light began to return, faintly glowing behind the fog. A shambling form emerged from the edge of the woods and slowly forced its way through the snow. He opened the frozen window to try and get a better picture through the mist. He could not make out many details, but as the form began to get closer he could see that it most resembled the shape of a man, save for two great antlers atop its head. It was terribly tall and thin, yet somehow could force its way through the snow with great strength. Its broad hands were sweeping the snow away from it as it purposefully tried to make its way towards the cabin. As soon as he realized the creature's path, he began to run down the stairs to board up the doors. He remembered, however, the immeasurable feet of snow that were between himself and the creature. He continued to watch as it got closer and closer. It was so close now that, were it to look up, it would surely see him. But it didn't. It continued on its mission, staggering and shambling along the way. Eventually, it reached the cabin and began to look around on the ground. It was looking for something, surely, but it was unclear what. Then, it began to try and dig downwards in the snow towards the cabin's wall. At first, it was not close to anything. But, as it continued shoveling bit by bit away, it began to inexplicably find its way closer and closer to where the cabin's front door was located. It was as though it knew where it should be, yet somehow could not quite find it. His heart was pounding at the sight of this creature beneath him. It was so close now that, if he were to try and close the window, it would surely know of his presence. He could only sit and watch. He knew all too well what it's doing. It was trying to find a way in. It kept working, but as it continued to shovel, the surrounding snow would fall into place. Eventually, it grew frustrated and began to claw at its own skin, letting dark blood flow into the surrounding snow. He thought of how the blood had oozed just that way from his brother as he had cut him up and could not help but throw up. The creature's head shot up towards him. Now he could see its face. Or, where its face would have been. The antlers were poking out from a crude cloth-like mask. The only thing visible was its sunken, dead eyeballs and its mouth. Its lips were tattered like shredded rags and its teeth were all but gone. And it saw him now. Had the creature somehow jumped up to the window and killed him at once, he would have died in much less a state of terror that he was in now. Not because of what the creature did, but because of what it didn't do. Upon seeing him, it didn't continue to dig. It stared at him for what seemed an eternity and then, slowly, sat down in the snow. This seemingly undecipherable action gave him even more distress. He wished it would somehow end him at once and spare him from this torment. Then, he realized what it was doing. It was waiting for the snow to melt. "Go ahead and wait," he yelled. "I've seen storms like this before. You could be waiting for days more." But the creature did not seem to even comprehend what was being said. As the fog began to fade away into the late morning, he could see it more and more clearly. Its skin was gray and cracked, except for the parts which the creature had just torn. The gashes were still slowly dripping dark blood into the surrounding snow. It appeared as though a ring of crimson surrounded the snow on which the creature was sitting. Hours must have gone by, yet this thing still sat patiently. The sky was very clear now, illuminating its grotesque form even more. It was totally emaciated, sickly, and bony. He was sure it must have felt cold, yet it did not appear to make any fuss about sitting in the below freezing temperatures with no clothes or cover, save for the rags on its face. "I hope you're enjoying it down there," he yelled. He pretended that he was getting some sort of advantage over the thing by berating it from above. In truth, it was more for his own sanity. He had not been able to speak to anyone for weeks. His brother had been too sick to talk, so he was not unaccustomed to talking with something which would give no response. He continued to try and get something, anything, out of it, when it raised its hands to its head. At first, it looked as though it was rubbing its head in pain. However, it became clear to him that it was now trying to remove the cloth that was wrapped around its head. It was struggling at first, its nails clawing into the skin underneath and soaking the rag in more blood. However, to his horror, the creature finally got hold of the rag and began to unwind it from its head. It twisted and unraveled the cloth, which seemed to be yards long at this point, until its face was finally visible in the sunlight. Upon seeing it, dread shot through him. It was not this creature's face. It was the face of his brother. Oh, God! He began to weep now. "Are you here to punish me?" he yelled through his tears. The creature continued to look right at him. He was sick. He cried. Was I to let him suffer longer and eventually come to the same fate as him? If I am being tormented for my unwillingness to die, then so be it. The creature still made no acknowledgement of what he was saying and continued to watch him. If even the man without sin suffered here on earth, then so must I 100 times for what I have done. But I will see to it that you do, too. He said to the creature. Who knows how long you may wait? And I hope you do wait. I hope it becomes unbearable for you to sit down there. I hope you can know what I felt, to see your one source of food, yet being unable to attain it. God willing, we shall be here weeks more. He was yelling down at the creature now when he felt a drop of water on the back of his neck. It startled him as he turned to look up and was met with another drop on his forehead. Again, another drop of water fell onto his face. It was dripping from the icicles above the window. Slowly but steadily, they continued to drip onto him. He turned again to look at the creature, still sitting in a ring of its own blood. However, it was no longer gawking at him without response. It was grinning at him now, waiting patiently for the snow to melt.